And hello to all of you beautiful people out there in the cause and service to white well-being. This, of course, is It's a Late Night Somewhere, and we are laid back, Oliver and Jared and myself. And we're happy to have all of you with us today. I see a bunch of wonderful people. Snow Duchess, Laurel is here, Joel, Shauna is here. I've seen Seaver is here. Of course, the great Spartan warrior queen I saw a little earlier. Samantha Fox, Jennifer is here. JT, what a great crowd. It is always wonderful to be surrounded by this rapidly expanding family. Daughter of Albion, Zandrophin, Wyatt, Iron Will, what a great name. Machiavellia Sucks. So, yeah, great to see you all. We're going to be having a little chat. We wanted to try out, I don't know if you all know, and perhaps some of you all can provide some information to us, and specifically to me, as and there's Jason Allen. Andre is here, American Life, Canadian longboarder. Nice to see you. Corey, Renee, Jade, Comics. Yes, good to see you all. I wonder if you all could provide some information on this new streaming that YouTube is going to be forcing us into. I, earlier today, looked into it. They're going to be ending the Hangouts integration from Google with YouTube as a means of live streaming, which of course is a nice, clean, simple way to live stream. And we have been utilizing that here because as your host and on my channel, I don't want to end up being the audio and visual engineer rather than someone who is communicating to you the ideas, the dialectics, the lexicon of going free and interviewing guests and the like. So I don't want to essentially be juggling what funny screen am I going to put up next and what's this going to be next on the screen. So many options with so many different third-party providers. And so that's why I have largely stayed away from OBS and similar platforms. And so now we're going to have YouTube in this integration. So I looked into their upcoming alternative. I was able to find a video from a live streamer, professional live streamer, a great many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of subscribers and millions or something in this order of minutes watched. And he said, never use this software that YouTube is going to be forcing us into. Now, this was, I think, maybe about 8 months ago that he made this video, and perhaps he knew that this was coming even then. But he said it is garbage and useless. So I looked into it. Now, this was, of course, his opinion from however many months ago that was. And I looked into it and was going to use it today, only to discover that the description portion of this I guess part of the YouTube frame is shorter than the description that we currently have by way of the integration with Hangouts. There is also no place to put the hashtags on this other live streaming mechanism. And then after all of that, you come to and this, I don't know about the background, but this other live streamer said that in the background, this other platform does nothing for sending this message out to others who might be interested in seeing your stream. So it actually inhibits the ability of your stream for others to find out about your stream. So it's not being promulgated or suggested on people's feeds as a result, only to find out that once you go through all of those steps, you come to what's your third-party software that you're going to be using to stream by way of this garbage mechanism. So if you all have any knowledge about that and what's coming up, please tag me in the chat tonight, and we can possibly have a discussion about it, because this coming month we are going to be forced out of Hangouts and we'll be streaming by an alternative means here on YouTube. So having said that, again, it's a big welcome to see you all. If you have any questions, you can tag Jared or myself in those questions. If you just write to us in the normal chat, we may see it, but there's a smaller chance of that. Of course, you have your super chatting options. If you absolutely have to have a question answered or a statement read by way of YouTube. It's the normal 33%. And then you have Entropy, which is also open and running right now. We are live over there, and it looks like we have 8 watching. You can super chat there at 15%, and by way of the familiar alternative at 4%. The Entropy and the familiar alternative you can find down in the description, and just go a little spelunking and you'll find them down there. And if you want, I might put up a poll on Entropy, and you can also ask questions on Entropy that can be voted on. So all of that is there for you to check out. I've built it out so that it has a banner and it's personalized for you. It's not their generic layout, as some of you may have already seen on other channels. So if you are so interested, check that out. If not, then you can just stay with us here on YouTube. And as Jared mentioned when he came up with the brilliant idea of It's Late Night Somewhere, this is a laid back stream. None of us are on video. It's like listening to your radio late night somewhere, maybe with a drink of water. Or and there you have some magic that occasionally occurs on It's Late Night Somewhere, since it is laid back. But I'll pass it over to Jared so we can get into this discussion. It's going to be actually very interesting. But do ask your questions, and I will be attentive to them.
Well, I am drinking water, and yes, we're putting on our late night radio voices. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, it's been a few months since we've done one of these. We've been experimenting with different formats, and also, as Jason was just speaking to, of course, we have to stay nimble with different technologies. But I assure you, it's all coming together. It will all weave together more as we will continue to increase our activity and everything we're doing together here. Oliver of Semiogogue was one of the very first people that we had on It's Late Night Somewhere when we started occasionally doing these back in February. So it is fitting that he's back. Always great to speak with him. And just as a quick housekeeping note, the after party will be on Saturday this week. And stay tuned a little later. If you missed this week's announcements on Twitter earlier in this week, then you just have to hang tight for scheduling to know the time and the guest. But it's another great guest, someone entirely new to the after party in this just truly stellar lineup that we've been able to compile. Jason and I are really enjoying. We're on quite a run right now. We're speaking to some new people to us, and it's been just incredible these last few weeks, and then the continuing few weeks will be into August. So stay tuned. I'll keep you on the edge of your seat a little bit, but it is great to see everybody. And we wanted to speak with Oliver tonight because one of the great things about It's Late Night Somewhere, and actually, Oliver, I have to thank you, because we spoke almost a year ago, and you had a great idea about using different formats of live streams to kind of build up to other live streams, or kind of create a buzz and get the community involved as well. And what I mean by that is, It's Late Night Somewhere, what you're listening to right now, as Jason indicated, is our most informal, laid-back stream. That doesn't mean it's not meaty, especially because we're not on camera. Sometimes we can have guests kind of pop in, and sometimes people feel, maybe because they're not on camera, they feel a little more open. And sometimes both guests and audience alike really share personal things or deep thoughts. So it's not that it's not meaty, but it's just a different kind of a format. And one of the things it could be used for, and this is the great idea that Oliver had pitched to me all that time ago, is that we could kind of speak with a guest and speak more directly with the audience as kind of a way to just chew on ideas in anticipation of an upcoming stream. So let's say we were going to have someone on in a month from now that we've never had on before, and it's some kind of well-known name and people are excited about it. Well, we could bring on some smaller YouTubers, up-and-coming people. Not that Oliver's a smaller YouTuber. You know, he has a great presence. But we could bring on smaller people. We could even bring in some of you from the chat and kind of hash out what we might want to talk about and ask this new guest that we're having in a month. So we want to start doing things more like that with you that are interactive and kind of come up with some ideas and questions together. The reason that we're doing this with Oliver tonight, in and of itself, is always interesting to talk with Oliver. But we are trying to get together a stream, maybe a series of streams with someone that, unlike the example I gave, isn't new to us, two people who are not new to us, but it will be an interesting conversation. And that is Jefferson Lee and Josh Neal, our friends Jefferson and Josh. They did what was, to my mind, a very fascinating stream called The Caucasian Question a few weeks ago. And they were both on screen together. They were in the same location. So you got their dynamic, they're old friends, and it's great to see that dynamic. And the way that I described it is, I think it is a time capsule. If you wanted to show people in the future what young white men were thinking about in the early 21st century, then that's a great cross section of what's on our minds, a lot of our minds. It had a nice mixture of kind of meandering through different topics, but they still were able to give some depth and some interesting food for thought. And of course, there's a lot there. It's a 2-hour stream. And I contacted them and I said, I'd like to kind of get the mixture of you two with different people, like have Jefferson and Josh on and then bring Oliver in and see how they mix. Have Jefferson and Josh on and bring another person on and see how they mixed, but all based on this Caucasian Question video that they'd done, this stream that they'd done. And I remembered, though, that Oliver, as it were, had his own video called The Caucasian Question from, I believe, back in March. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Oliver, why don't you unmute your mic and say hello? And I'd like to we'll start by however you want to reveal or not reveal. If you could just give people a little idea of what your video called The Caucasian Question is about, some things that maybe compare and contrast with Josh and Jefferson's stream. Obviously, it's a huge 2-hour stream, so we're going to get into some specific questions about their stream. So don't feel like you need to hit every single point. But if you could just kind of introduce people to where you were going with that and how you see it in the context of their video, and then we'll be off to the races and just start to get into the meat of it more. But welcome, Oliver.
Right on. Well, thank you both very much for having me. Is my audio coming through like it should?
Sure is.
Right on. Yeah, again, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me on again. It's, I think, the third or fourth time, something like that. And I know that people who espouse any kind of individualist ideas are definitely a questionable product. So I appreciate the fact that you're still willing to speak with me and bounce ideas back and forth. I won't say turn up the dial, but there you have it. Yeah, the original.
Whoa, Dave Rubin. No, Dave Rubin.
Yeah, right.
Anyone that watched the Jefferson and Josh stream, they rib on Dave Rubin for saying turning up the dial of ideas. So right. Oliver's trying to stick me in the ribs by tweeting out, we're going to turn out the dial of ideas and bring that phrase up.
No, that was more a tip of the hat to Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Josh. So originally I had posted the clip about the Caucasian Question, and the genesis of that was simply my reflection on the fact that we Westerners often think about all sorts of other questions. They're seldom questions about ourselves, except insofar as we're constantly navel gazing, looking for new things to feel guilty about. But what I have in mind specifically is things like the Polish question, the land question, for example, the Polish question being historical, the land question in South Africa, all sorts of questions that have been raised in the past. And it's almost a rhetorical technique. There are other questions that have been frequently discussed more recently that I probably don't have to dredge forth to the top of mind for everyone. But basically, I said to myself, well, what will happen if we just kind of turn all these various questions around and instead posit at the center of our attention this notion of a Caucasian question? And to be honest with you, most of what I did in that clip was simply to mention aspects of a certain other question, but to do so in a fashion that put whites or Westerners, or Western kind, if you will, at the center of the discussion. I found it to be a diverting pastime. to see the parallels in, certain things. For example, whites, as well as some other groups, are accused of being, deeply hungry for money and power, and they are said to swarm like locusts across countries to suck up all their wealth, and that we're cunning and sneaky that way, the way whites are doing what they're doing with their whiteness, and all the rest. So it was a rhetorical exercise, and not to say that I didn't mean it, bearing in mind that rhetoric, you've got sophistry where it's all about convincing people that white is black and black is white. But there is a Platonic tradition of rhetoric, which is all about the idea that public speaking should help to lead people to the truth. So if there's anyone, waiting in the wings, ready to pounce because I use the word rhetoric, and that, that must mean therefore that I'm somehow disingenuous or insincere, I put that out there. So much for my clip on it. It was a bit of branding fun, if you will. The clip that Jefferson Lee put out there together with Josh, I have only watched it once, but I did make some notes on it. That went a good bit further. It was not, I think, merely a rhetorical exercise. It was, and again, it's not my clip, so I hope I don't misrepresent it, but it seemed to me to be more about a statement of position. There's certainly one thing that I agree with them on entirely, which is that we should be the focus of our attention, and that we should own up to whatever our issues are and focus upon straightening them out ourselves. But I think that's probably, from that point on, I think I diverge in my approach to things. They seem to be interested in something that is post-American, if you will, and they seem to be interested in the creation of new myths, presumably. I would imagine post-American myths. There seemed to be a feeling there that they wanted to dispense with old myths that they felt. Again, this is me characterizing them, and I may have it wrong. Only they can speak for themselves. But it seemed to me that they wanted to dispense with old myths and move forward into some bright future that apparently would involve futurist, presumably European and probably Italian futurist art all over the walls. They mentioned things about how there's no America worth saving, or at least having felt that way at times. They mentioned the notion that people can't handle education, or that most people can't handle education. And they, in many respects, sort of tried to push many aspects of America, or what's been called the American experiment, into the rear view mirror. So I diverge with them in a number of ways. I say so respectfully because I don't want to get involved in, bullshit, drama, and spats. But I think it's safe to say that I'm of a different mind.
Well, I'll just say, obviously, you are well able to explain, and I'm sure our audience knows, that you're representing how you interpreted that. Jefferson and Josh, I've told them a week and a half ago that we'd be speaking to you about this tonight, and that hopefully it was a warm-up to all of us speaking. So
yeah, and that's fair. I do want to emphasize that. That's just what I caught of it. And one thing that I've certainly seen is that it's really easy to misunderstand what people are coming from, or where people are coming from, or not to get the full context. I've watched a few of their videos. I spoke to Jefferson. I think he was involved in one of the live streams we did.
Actually, yeah, I believe you were on with him and Josh in a big one.
Right.
Philosophicat as well. It was like, I think the third. It's late night somewhere. I do have a playlist. I do have a playlist on BitChute of all the recordings. I think the ones that appeared on both my channel and Jason's channel. So if you want to check out my BitChute, the archive should be there.
Right, and far be it from me to misrepresent. I don't want Jefferson Lee getting me in side mount or some shit. So yeah.
Yeah, he does know that Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But no, they're good guys, and I'm sure, I don't want to speak for anyone, but I'm sure they'd understand that you're just taking in your interpretations. I do want to talk about that Americanism. From what I remember about the handling education, I don't know if they quite phrased it that way so much as the kind of more esoteric or nihilistic kind of thinking that breaks you down in university that some professors will expose you to is not quite meant for everyone. And a lot of people can't handle that and really aren't meant to, which does have more whiffs of a traditional ordered society, something that we might get into a little later, I presume, depending on how this conversation tonight goes, about understanding caste and type and things like that. Not to say that it has to be rigid, as in whatever your father did, you have to do. From my being acquainted with their material, again, I don't want to speak for them. I don't think that they would say the same either. But it wasn't quite education in general. It was more specifically about these kind of deep questions that break down meaning, and that relates to the myth making that you were talking about as well. And they were trying to put a fine point on the fact that it might be wonderful to have these myths about how America was founded, but if the average person out there conflates that with the myth with these practical measures of how power works and how political effect is taken and things change, and they think that it's just this model of yeoman farmers going up against the greatest empire in the world at the time with muskets and taking them down, and don't realize that a lot of it had to do with French money or powers back in England who actually wanted the American revolt to happen and just said, might as well just let it happen. That there's a lot more shade to it. And so that it was also in the context of that kind of thing as well. I'm curious because you don't strike me as, I guess, the stereotype, at least, of the patriotic red, white, and blue waving American, but I guess it's the individual side of you. What is it, if you could speak a little bit to what you're protecting when you hear this idea of post-Americanism and being a little hesitant about their commentary on that?
Well, I've heard the argument made that the U.S. is hopeless, or that what's been called the great American experiment is doomed. And even that further, it's always been hopeless, given that it's got liberal, egalitarian, or individualistic strands that are running through it. But I see things a bit differently. For me, the liberal domain, to put it simply, it's basically just coextensive with the range of action proper to a man of free birth. I view individualism as it's basically just the conscious pursuit of self-knowledge and self-development. Now, for egalitarianism, I see that basically as nothing less than equality before the law, certainly nothing more than equality before the law. And I'm amused by the notion that there's anything objectionable in recognizing that government requires consent of the governed, but there are people who see things very differently. And here I'm not trying to hammer on Jefferson and Josh. I'm speaking of a much broader swath. There are a lot of people, for example, on the progressive left, who see things very differently. But on the right in particular, there are a lot of people who view liberalism as a kind of, a creeping Oriental sickness, if you will. And I think they view individualism as more the same, as a kind of libertine licentiousness and nihilism. They imagine that egalitarianism amounts to a belief that all people are fundamentally interchangeable, rather than the strict idea of equality before the law. And, for many people, the notion of requiring consent of anyone is baffling to them. After all, they know best, or the people who buy expensive shoes with their donations do. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think it's likely that a lot of people have more or less allowed their own terms to be redefined and their own histories to be very poorly rewritten. And to me, all of that is a little bit less than interesting. And I want to go ahead.
No, it sounds like you were still saying something, so please finish.
Well, it's basically this idea of how our terms have been redefined. And again, I want to emphasize here, I'm not specifically talking about Jefferson and Josh, but if one of these jackals dressed in silk happens to claim that liberalism is all about dispensing with all normative social standards, or going further and encouraging all kinds of depraved bullshit, I'm under no obligation to allow these people to redefine the terms of art used by my ancestors. If commies paid by other commies caper and prance on TV singing all their songs about how egalitarianism is the idea that all social inequality must be removed, again, I'm free to dismiss them as the Judas goats that they actually are. And, you know, when you come to things like consent of the governed, it's not a matter of theory as far as I'm concerned. It's not just a matter of how we wish things to be. It's a recognition of how things are, or at least of how they can be. I mean, freeborn men will not allow government to exercise power that exceeds its authority. And to whatever extent that claim might be falsifiable, it underscores the need for freeborn men, I think, far more than any justification for throwing our existing form of government onto the trash heap. So think of me as kind of like a traditionalist who's looking at the American system and saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if you want to wade into this topic, then we have to kind of dip our toes into the subject of what's called liberalism, or more importantly, individualism, the idea that, you know, there's an atomization in the West and where that came from and all the rest. But I want to stop there so I'm not just, you know, droning endlessly.
Right. And I see, Jason, your mic is open. So I'm going to try to say something quickly that has a lot of implications and I hope kind of ripples out into the rest of the conversation. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on it and unpack this more. Oliver, I'm glad you said what you said, because as usual, a lot of it does come back to defining our terms, right? So I agree with you that there's a difference between our particularly European desire for that individualism, and I speak about this often. It could be the Northern Alting, it could be the ancient Greek assemblies of free men wanting to express themselves, right? But I want to mix this in. And yes, these words, liberalism, they get conjured up in different ways, in different contexts by different people. So that's what I mean about needing the right definitions. And I'm sure this is something that'd be really important to talk about if we do, in fact, get you and Josh and Jefferson all on the line at the same time. But I think that you could say that this need for individualism that you're talking about is very real. It's there. It's in us. But there's a perversion of it, much the same way that feminism and femininity sound almost like the same thing. But feminism is a perversion. It's taking the truths of femininity, it's inverting and perverting things, and then using that as a subversive force in society. And so this is my quick little volley that I'm going to put to both of you. And why you hear me talk about the folk so much is that without organic connections, and the main one is the folk, a nation being a family of people, that there's no mitigating or balancing factors that keep power in check. And so the kind of state power and overreaches that we're increasingly seeing in the United States, or especially in Great Britain, all the crazy stuff we hear going on in Great Britain right now, is the other side of the coin of the kind of toxic individualism. And I'm invoking that word individualism again, the way that one might invoke feminism, that it is this is a toxic coin because there are no mediating factors in the middle. That used to be, you know, when you were on tap in February, we spoke about houses. There were these aristocratic houses and things like that, everyone feeling related and having more bonds to each other through these houses and family connections. Or in city-states, same thing with the paterfamilias, because city-states in the ancient world weren't collections of individuals so much as cults of families, and different families kind of, you know, vying for power and making alliances and whatnot. But before I get too long, and what I tried to start out with is something very short. Yes, my point is simply that the kernel of what you're saying is true and in us, but it has been so warped and perverted that people, the same way I used feminism, the same way the state is now taking the role of the husband and thus perverting something so that all of these feminists are standing on, they think that they have power. They think that they're floating free agents, but it's only because of that proxy, that propped up power of the state that's providing the role that the family and the husband used to provide. So in much the same way, people can be freaks and go out and parade and say that I'm a man today and a woman tomorrow and a lizard the next day, only because of the false propped up power of the state right now. And it's actually because now there's no mitigating factors. You will have the overreach of the state. This will eat itself and you will get tyranny. This is exactly what Frody Midjord's last Skanza Forum in March was about, anarcho-tyranny, how these two things go together. So I hope I painted enough of a picture, because there's a lot to that, to volley to the two of you and start to hear how that hits the two of you.
I will just briefly, and I'll let Oliver speak to that first. First thing I want to do, though, is I want to mention that we had a super chat by Reactionary of £5. Thank you very much. It's a late time of night for you, so this is a perfect show. Finally caught you guys live. I've been having great success in arguments with the lexicon. Go free. Thank you very much for that. I'm glad you have, and thank you for sharing your testimony of using the dialectics and lexicon. I have received more just since the last going free, and I encourage all of you, when you use the lexicon and dialectics and you have the success, come back, share that success with us. If you have some challenges, come back and share those challenges, and I will help you through, and it will help everyone else who hears those conversations, about those challenges that you have. It is about practicing, as is the case with all things, but you will see with these dialectics and lexicon that you will begin transforming not only yourself, but your friends, family, and strangers that you have contact with. So it's a very exciting time to be alive, very exciting time to be part of this curative contagion that we are the absolute seminal element to, spreading from one continent, from one community, from one brother to the next, from one sister to the next, and enlightening and helping our people go free. It is something that is truly magical work that is working for our well-being. Finally, we have something in which we can invest our time and see a result. And folks, we are seeing results. I continue to have more people come to the cause, more people offering to donate their time to do different jobs and to fill different roles. We are assembling these teams. The train is slowly leaving the station. Steam is getting underway, and it's time to jump on board, because before you know it, we're going to leave the steam in the dust, and we're going to be a futuristic maglev train on our way to recapturing our destiny. Thank you very much for that, Reactionary, that £5 investment to the cause of white well-being. We have some questions that are coming in, and I guess I'll save some of those for a little bit later. I'll set them off to the side. I do want to acknowledge that I see some other great people that have shown up. Bigot Smalls, I see. Ryan is here. Simon JJ. Siege is here. Gov Hater is here. Art Deco has shown up. Shelly, I think I mentioned Robert. A lot of great people. JT, Shadows and Dust. I saw, what's his, the Doberman. What's the rest of the name? I said hello to him. Great to see
you. Bruno
Doberman. 30-year-old boomer. Of course, the Doberman's having a special place in my heart. So, and then of course, HB 2014 has shown up. Great to see you here as well. Josh Randall, the first Josh Randall, the second Josh Randall might show up before, or unless he's already here. And I just,
so we really have two separate Josh Randalls in our community now.
And they are both diehard, fantastic warriors and heroes.
Yeah. And they look like they could be brothers from the little shots I've seen. It's very funny.
It's amazing. I see we also have Philosophicat here tonight. So great to see you as well. Andre is here. What a fantastic thing. Great time to be getting together and a great conversation to be having. Oliver, I'll toss it over to you, and you can begin to speak to what Jared had to say, his volley, as he put it. And then I will actually, when you do that, if you could put into a nutshell the disagreement as you see it between yourself and our other good friends, and really draw that line so that I can see where that difference is, and then I can speak to the difference and perhaps go a little bit of my own direction. But I pass it over to you, Oliver.
Thank you, sir. I guess the quick thing to do is just wrap up the point about individualism. One thing that is specific with me is that I have a framework of reckoning these various movements and trends and political philosophies and the rest that is fits my outlook and is a bit different than many other people use. I look at it as a framework of conscious and unconscious. So if you, for example, were to put together, if you have a piece of paper in front of you, just draw a cross on the piece of paper. And at the top, write few. And at the bottom arm of the cross, write many. And at the right arm of the cross, write conscious. And at the left arm of the cross, write unconscious. And in the top right quadrant, write individuate. In the top left quadrant, write atomize. In the bottom left quadrant, write collectivize. And in the bottom right quadrant, write cooperate. And it should become apparent at that point what my approach is and why I feel as though individuation, if not individualism, is a fundamental thing that is necessary for the health of a nation. To be more specific, promoting individuation. So atomizing and collectivizing, these two unconscious twins, whether we're talking about the few or the many, are what I wish to avoid. And by the same token, to individuate necessitates bearing in mind the need for cooperation, and thereby you can, through consciousness of who and what you are and what you're about, avoid issues such as the poisonous atomization, that Jared kind of underlined with the nice example of femininity versus feminism. So, that's just to kind of close down the discussion of all the business about individualism versus whatever, because we could obviously wind down into that burrow forever. And it would probably be almost as boring for us as it would be for the audience. But to your point about underlining what I feel like the issue is with that I have that's a disagreement with Jefferson and Josh. As I said, I watched two of their clips, and there was one that was more recent that I enjoyed watching. They're a little longer, so I watch them at a faster speed because I still want to see everything. And, it was actually kind of nice. Jefferson just jumped forward and said that, his family is more recently in America, that he doesn't feel as connected to it. He doesn't feel that sense of being rooted here. Basically saying stuff like he's not into the whole America thing. And I appreciate the honesty. You can at least work with that. You could say, here is where I stand. And that kind of forthrightness is good. But that said, it seemed to me that in embracing this idea of something that's post-American, as soon as you assert this notion of post-American, that basically is putting forth the notion that the starting point for everything now under this discussion is post-American. It's all in the rearview mirror. There's no need to sit at the table and determine whether or not something does or doesn't work. And so, there's the risk of that embodied in that classic old expression of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And there are a number of assumptions that are involved in it, at least from my perspective as well. There's the idea that, we've arrived at this point, and liberalism has clearly been, something that contributed to the atomization and the degradation of our culture. All of this is clearly degenerate. And, it seems that, we've got something going on here. And you hear various explanations for it. At one time, you might hear that it's inherent to individualism itself. It necessarily atomizes, and it couldn't go anywhere but to where we have arrived that is so, wrong. And then on the other hand, usually held with some sort of mental schizophrenia in mind at the same time, there's the idea that no, individualism has been perverted and it has been subverted and it has been used as a weapon against us. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, okay, if it's a weapon that was subverted and is intended to be used against us, then we have the question of whether or not there's anything truly wrong with it in and of itself. You know, is it because it necessarily has these qualities within it that lead here, or is it because it's subverted? Which one is it? And what I'm seeing is quite a bit of less than precise thinking, I think, in terms of unpuzzling that. You know, are we to, if deer get into my garden through my fence and eat all my tomatoes and peppers, am I supposed to assume that there's something fundamentally wrong with gardening in and of itself, and that we have to dispense with all gardening, and that instead what we're going to do is grow just vast tubs of mealworms in the darkness of a locked basement? Or is the issue perhaps that, you know, maybe we need better fences around our damn garden? So that's one issue. That's sort of the more philosophical side of things. But just to wrap this, there's a second dimension, which I think is more utilitarian. And I think that it's worth considering whether those who wish to go after our constitutional republic are being at all realistic. You know, it seems like the idea is that the only way to go after the anti-whites is to dismember the entire animal by carving it up at the joints. But I think that's profligate. We are currently disorganized, except for some few of us. And to a considerable extent, we're demoralized. You know, not people specifically who are, you know, whatever you want to call it, red-pilled or, you know, whatever. But many out there, many whites out there are demoralized even when they don't know it. And we've got a list, I think everyone would agree, of very important things to do that goes on for miles. You know, so that Europeans can do whatever they please. I'm happy to provide assistance to them where it seems prudent, you know, fellow feeling, cooperation. But I am an American. And as such, I have no interest in toppling my own institutions to replace them with authoritarian collectivism. In my view, that would be stupid. Our constitutional republic, I think anyway, provides enough flexibility to permit the reestablishment of control, or at very least using existing systems of representative government. You know, I think it holds out a higher chance of success than descending into the chaos that always accompanies any kind of massive political upheaval. If you'll bear with me for just one moment more, who would imagine that war and lawlessness present circumstances that are easier to master or to direct than our current economic or social or political battle spaces? If you can't even manage to make some money or obtain, and I speak generally, I'm not talking about any specific person, but if a person can't even manage to make money or obtain a professorship or get elected to public office, what makes them think that they're going to be worth a damn as a revolutionary? It's absurd. Who would imagine that it's easier to impose one's will on the battlefield than it is on a debate floor or in business negotiations or in scholarly disputes? You know, a fool maybe? Some few people, at least, some few of the people agitating for revolution of one kind or another, they seem oblivious to the fact that all the radical fire that they want to see rain down is far harder to handle than all the other aspects of life they've already shown little or no mastery of. So I think it's prudent to be realistic. Do we really want to go after the anti-whites and try to protect all the various ethnicities that fall under the umbrella of white? You know, do we want to do that at the same time that we're trying to topple our existing government? I mean, surely we can do things in order. You know, I kind of wonder if removing the focus from other groups and saying that we should place the focus upon ourselves is not, in some cases, merely a way to kind of turn the cannons, the radical cannons of some authoritarian collectivist future on the existing institutions that form what little remains of America.
All right. I think I have a little better understanding of where, I guess, the subjects that, because there are a lot of, it seems to me like a lot of tangential issues that are related to some central issues that are really And this is ultimately, at least it strikes me as, and correct me where I go wrong, and perhaps Josh Jefferson will show up in the chat, and they can also correct me where I go wrong. Oliver, you do, please, as you're here. But it really seems to be a discussion about a thought exercise about America, and does it break up? Does it fracture? Is there secession? What is the cause of the current malaise, the state we're in, the anti-white environment? How has the power been usurped? How are we now in this thrall position? And what can we do to correct things for the future? There strikes me initially as this notion, this fallacy of human thinking that is going to be very difficult to extirpate from human thinking, and perhaps never will be something accessible to the masses. In fact, I'm sure it'll be something that's never accessible to the masses, and that is that this idea we have to, as people who are serving white well-being and wanting to take this to the next level of actually doing something more than just sharing our ideas with those who are intelligent enough and brave enough in an environment where love can be defined as hate on a global scale, intelligent enough and courageous enough to come to us and get the information, and then just feel quite unhappy about the state of affairs, to actually do something with the time that we have and the time that we are given with our lives, because that's all we truly have are those minutes and those hours and days. And the question is, what are we going to do with those minutes, hours, and days? Are we going to lead licentious, consumeristic lives that are meaningless and leave nothing behind except perhaps relatives or even direct descendants who hate us for ever having lived? Or are we going to do something heroic and live for an eternity through our people, being effectively, not literally, but effectively reborn again and again in the body of our people in a much more glorious day, a much more glorious tomorrow than the today that we were born into? So the question that I'm speaking to here, the idea that I'm speaking to here, is that there is something that we can set in stone that will cure things for all time. The reality is that the seasons are cyclical, yes, but civilizations are only cyclical because man is a cyclical animal. This is something that we have to accept, that people don't talk about enough. It is the reason why people believe that there can be a cure or a remedy for a specific ailment of mankind that can be eternal. That is that is being myopic. It is myopia. In fact, we need systems, and I'm absolutely confident there's no reason for anybody to feel depressed about this. If we can walk on the moon, we can do this. We need to develop systems of governance, systems of economy, etc., that are cyclical in nature, so that they serve our nature, balances of power in all spheres of life, because you are not going to be able to set up beings above us that will run things perfectly or beautifully, and no doctrine at any time, no law at any time has enforced itself. It always requires the implementation and the interpretation of man. And that is, of course, men and women when I say that. So it always requires people to make these interpretations and to either refrain from applying a rule or law, or implement a rule or law or interpretation that magnifies or dilates a existing law or what have you in a way that is actually harmful or contradictory to what the original law or purpose of the rule, etc., was from the beginning. So we are not going to be able to say that the U.S. government is X, and X is this general assortment of ideas, and since we have arrived at this outcome, therefore X and everything in X has to go. The reality is, again, we're not going to be able to set anything in stone that will cure all of our ails. But more importantly, the issue specifically that we are speaking to, and actually, if I could just set that aside for a moment, speaking to the multiplicity of the different concepts, the different ideas that undergird American governments and the like, surely we can see that these have been successful at different periods, and surely we can see where they have been undermined and supplanted. As I have said before, what is written is immaterial. It is the individuals who are making the interpretations and applying these rules and these laws, etc., to civilization. And what does this come down to? Since we are not going to be able to have angels descend from heaven who will do all right and all good and are all moral to govern us, since there is no way to develop something other than what we have, and we cannot get another species, we have to deal with the species that we are. We have to have balances of power. Humanity, which have achieved Western civilization, we have gone the furthest in creating the most fair, legal, hospitable, etc. environments in the history of the world, and yet we are still a step away from something that is closer to perfection, something that balances the power, the avarice, the greed, the desire that exists in all of humanity, and that drives no matter what economic level or what power level individuals are at. That is what will keep things on track. The balancing of power, we will be able to resolve that. Specifically, going back to what I set aside a moment ago, is the issue of individualism. And when we're talking about individualism, we are not talking about a political concept. This is a wrap, a layer, a documentation that we have just laying on top of who and what we are. Individualism is not going to go anywhere in the white race, no matter how much we dislike it, no matter how much right now, and when I say that, no matter how much we dislike it, speaking from the point of view that, and this is an absolute truism given our age, that in a world of collectivism, individualism is suicide. And if we stay on this path of celebrating individualism, we absolutely will succumb to white erasure. We are going to have to force ourselves to be something that we are less like than the other races of man. And that is very ethnically or racially focused on our identity as a collective to achieve our well-being individual well-being by way of that collective. If we focus our energies, and this is my own opinion about this, if we focus our energies on shelving as best we can, it's not going anywhere, no more than the multiplicity of eye colors in the white race for now, or hair colors or skin tones. Individualism is going nowhere. But if we focus on shelving it as best we can in the present, we will survive long enough for it to be able to make its natural reemergence, because as I say, it's not going anywhere, and then serve us as a collective once again, as it has served us in the past. But really, and I do want to say this for those who are listening, and that is that this is a brilliant thought experiment. And these kinds of discussions should be had. They are stimulating, and they can help to give us ideas and understanding of a future that we will inevitably come to. Having said that, it is still a thought experiment. We are not on the verge of dissolving the American government. It is not on the verge of crumbling of its own accord. We need to, apart from these brilliant thought experimental discussions, to focus our efforts on pragmatic steps right now to get more of our racial brothers and sisters out there, more of our white mothers and sisters, fathers and brothers out there, to adopt the process of going free and to come into service of white well-being. One of my big concerns when we have these discussions, when brilliant people like Oliver and brilliant people like Jared and Josh and Jefferson, when they're having these discussions, they are able to then walk away from them knowing that that was a stimulating intellectual exercise. I now think I have a little bit of better grasp on the future, and I'm laying down some bricks so that those who come behind me can lay down some more atop of those, and we can build something substantial for the future. But they know that they are not taking onto their shoulders a burden that is unanswerable. That is premature. That is imprudent. And too many folks who listen to these discussions, and that's why I'm just giving this little admonition for everyone. Too many folks who listen to these discussions descend into pessimism, and all they can think about is, how do we find a way? You know, they've decided perhaps that secession is the answer. And so how can we find a way to secede from the United States government? There is no answer to that question. You are going to drive yourself into the blackest depression. It won't happen immediately. I've been in this for a long time, but it will nonetheless happen. So don't focus when we talk about these brilliant subjects. Enjoy it, participate in it, give us your thoughts, ask your penetrating questions, and then once we're done with this, get right back to the very pragmatic, what sometimes may seem boring, what definitely seems, when you're thinking about these sorts of things, or if you're pondering how to secede, or you're pondering how to properly take back the entirety of the United States government, if that is your thinking, when you ponder those things, the actual steps you can take, like producing business cards that give the name and web address of your favorite content producers for white well-being, that suddenly seems like it's not worth doing. And that is where the error occurs. That is the most important thing that you can possibly do, because you are an element of H2O. I am an element of H2O, and all of us together become the tidal wave. You absolutely must be doing those things, because they will be the elements that lead to the tomorrow and the changing of the context in which there will be new opportunities for us in our lifetimes, new opportunities for us that we can take advantage of and take us places, perhaps even at speeds that you might now think impossible. So I'll pass it back. I know Jared has something to say on that. And I think we can even get a screen share here for Oliver's template that he was talking about. Let's see if I can put that up.
Yeah. While you do that, okay, let me just say this to bridge some of the things that we've been talking about. Jason, you just spoke about the balance of power. For anyone joining more recently, I spoke with Oliver a little earlier tonight about this idea of using individualism. If you can equate that with feminism, we could think of it as the bastardization of our individual instincts. Oliver likes to use this term, individuation, what you see up there on that screen, which I like that term as well. So let's bridge these things, that discussion about the balance of power, with the practical applications that Jason was just speaking to. I was saying that when you don't have organic connections in a society, you're going to have all these people that think they can create themselves out of nothing, but there's no levels in between the individual masses who are just partying in the streets and thinking that they can make anything up, and unmitigated, unregulated, unchecked power. And that's how tyranny and this kind of liberal free-for-all, and Oliver, forgive me, I know you were using the word liberal in a more classical sense before, but it's just the first word that came to mind. Whatever you want to call it, this freak show free-for-all are actually two sides of the same coin, tyranny and the free-for-all. That you need other levels in society to balance these things out and harmonize them. Now, organic connections, to my mind, are superior to some kind of agreed upon ideology. And that's, again, why I can arrive at it through several different ways, but this is a more philosophical, political science kind of way that I can arrive at supporting folkism, we can say. Now, Oliver, I notice that you're increasingly using the word we when speaking about white people. So I'm curious as to how you track your own development and how you see yourself as part of someone being of European descent, of being white, and what that means to you and how you see that politically.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when the word "we" gets mentioned, forgive my vulgarity, but my brother used to say, "Well, what's a we shit? You got a mouse in your pocket?" Right? Like when I'd be like, "Well, are we going to the restaurant?" And he's like, "No, we're not." We brings us to the subject of defining white, which I think is a worthwhile exercise. I think we're a little late into this discussion to take all of that up, but I think that my use of the term "we" corresponds to my ongoing considerations of how white can be defined and where I would fit into any such defined category. I think from the perspective of being focused on practical steps, and that's one thing I really like about what you and Jason are doing. You will engage in the intellectual roundabout and the rest. And I don't mean to be dismissive with that term. There's that side of it, and there's also like you have to hash those things out in order to have an understanding of where you stand and what's going on. But by the same token, you're both very interested in ways to actually start making positive changes occur. If that's not hopelessly vague, I think my point will be taken. So with that whole business of making positive changes occur, I think the most important thing, and I'm just going to tease a bit here, because this is the concept that I'm working on for a certain project I was kindly invited to participate in, being put together by Jared and a fellow named Porridge. I think it's important to take a new look at war, because it involves all this business of the individual and the collective, as they're usually referred to. I think there's a lot more I'm going to say about this, and some of it I'm going to try to say eloquently and concisely in a 5-minute span of time. But to tease a bit of it here, I think that a lot of the discussions about individuality versus this notion of collectivism really come down to a fundamental distinction in our culture that I have not, and please, anybody out there who has heard someone else talk about this, let me know. But as far as I know, I'm the only one who's raised this issue, certainly in this context. And that is that we have a division between the collective and the individual, and the need for one or the other relative to crisis circumstances. We have a cultural arrangement that addresses that issue. And that is the division between the civilian and the marshal. And that is why we have, for example, our recognition of individual rights and things like English common law. But if a bad situation comes down the line, then we can flip over to martial law, at which point, if you're out of line, you get put up against a wall and shot, because that's how things work in those circumstances. If you are, for example, treasonous, then you can enjoy your drumhead court-martial and be frog marched down to the gallows, lickety split. And I think a lot of us forget it. We have this situation where we have a civilian government structure, and in parallel, running along beside it at all times, kind of like the whole idea of break glass in case of fire, we have a parallel system that is much older. Everybody wants to talk about, pulling together and, the importance of hierarchy. Imagine how a drill instructor looks at somebody. He'd be like, "Oh, we have here somebody who feels like he's an individual. What are you, a special snowflake?" And there's a reason for that, because that has no place in a crisis response. And I think a lot of the people, again, I don't want to anticipate too much, so I'm going to wrap this. I want to have some tender bits to offer when it comes to this 5-minute clip for Jared and Porridge's project. But people seem to be completely oblivious to that distinction. They seem to be oblivious to the fact that there are ways in which the civilian police forces are being hyperinflated, that they're beginning to bloat and distort. It's like drawing a face on a balloon and then blowing it up too big, and it begins to look grotesque. The civil police forces are increasingly being forced to do a military's job, while the military are sitting over on the other side. And it's all because there is a trigger that happens with our people and with our peoples and our cultures. And that trigger is what kicks off the martial response. It's a crisis response. It's the same thing that in the past would have had the office of dictator brought in for the Romans, and they would have suspended normal government by the consuls, giving the power to the dictator. Same thing here. The commander-in-chief would send the military out. In theory, it's under civilian control at all times, but out there where the rubber meets the road, it's really what the generals say it is. And nobody has to really worry about triggering or safe spaces. The only triggers they're worried about are ones that, fire weapons. And so we have lost sight of those two realms. The one, the civil, and the other, martial. And after a fashion, it's because it's like we're getting sick, but it's never quite enough to trigger the immune system response that would entail bringing in the martial aspect. And so look at how people who are all shot in the ass with the idea of fascism, and they love uniforms. Fascists always love uniforms, uniformly, if you will. It's a fetish of theirs. And I think the rising of this whole fascination for authoritarian collectivism and more uniform behavior and the imposition of rules and regulations, it's based on a failure to understand that we have two tracks and they run side by side. One is the civil government, representative aspects, all this other nice stuff, individual rights, and then in parallel, break glass in case of fire. It's always over there on one side and it's ready to answer the crisis. That's where you come in and it's like, you ain't gotta like it. And we have no special snowflakes. And you might be asked to your face to go over there and die. And if you won't do that, then we'll shoot you. And that is the proper collective response to crisis. And because we haven't triggered the martial response, and most people are too simple-minded, frankly, most people, I shouldn't say that, they're too ignorant of their own heritage. I definitely want to retract that. Forgive me, that's a vestige of leftist elitism. Most people are too ignorant of their own heritage and history to understand that we have these two parallel tracks for a reason. And the one runs beside the other. And make no mistake, the martial aspect is the most primitive form of human government that has ever existed. And it is maintained over to one side in parallel with absolute hierarchy, life and death hierarchy. And so I think that when we think, to wrap this, when we think about individualism versus collectivism and the need for one in our current circumstances versus the need for the other, we have to recognize that in the past we had that system, but today we're in a state of war at all times in all places. And that's another thing that one day I'd like to talk about, is the notion of unrestricted warfare and the notion of the mobilization of our people to act in their own interests in a war that, unlike past wars, has no distinct field where weapons are used. That includes the information battle space, propaganda, social relations, interactions between the sexes, literature, control of academia, the media, as well as the rockets and the missiles and the things that make people turn into red mist. So there is a need to open up this understanding of what war is, as well as to recognize the things within our culture that previously we could have relied upon to confront these circumstances.
I think you mentioning the civil and the martial tracks is very important, something that needs to be spoken about, and I'm glad that you did. I think people who are reticent about doing this in the United States would say, when is the last time that you trusted the United States of America to enact martial law, and that it would be in the best interest of the American people as we understand it, versus just serving some kind of agenda of the empire? I think perhaps, I don't want to speak for him, but when a Jefferson or a Josh questions America, the America that we now know as young men, that's the America that we're thinking of. And I don't know if it's a question of scale, if it's just too damn big at this point. And again, it's an empire. It's certainly a multi-ethnic, multi-racial empire to some degree at this point. It's been co-opted. We know that. So in theory, I agree with you. And if, I don't know, I was living in Denmark in another time, then maybe I would trust that if the Danish people had to mobilize, I'd at least know I'm Danish and I'm fighting for Denmark and what it means to be Danish. But I think young men like me and Jefferson and Josh, who might cast a hairy eyeball at this talk of the Americanism, and I'm of two minds on it, admittedly. That's what I would throw back at you: is when's the last time that you could have trusted the American empire to enact martial law? If it was enacted tomorrow, it wouldn't be serving our interests.
Well, from my perspective, I am more interested in underlying the distinction and the fact that it has existed in our cultures for quite some time. And in fact, what used to be the case was that the military form of organization was kind of a more fundamental one, certainly in that period that gets glossed as the Dark Ages, where you have the feudal system and banner men and the rest. Certainly with the Mongol system, the Romans had a division, with the consuls and, the role of dictator, which was, in the most extreme of crises that they would want to centralize power in that way. I was less making an argument for the idea that we need to quote unquote trust our military, and more making an argument for we need to be aware of the cultural institutions we have available to us for addressing the very issues that everyone is trying to grapple with now as regards the role of the individual versus the collective, and the need to cooperate and work together now in the face of a threat. So as for the rest of it, though, you can kind of simply look at it and say, well, I don't know, look at a cop. If someone's trying to break into my house in the middle of the night, I pay them tax dollars for it, and they're likely to show up and deal with the problem or try. Yes, it's entirely likely that I may get a bad draw and end up with a cop who doesn't know what they're doing, or worse still, in some rare circumstances, I'll get an idiot who accidentally shoots me. But for the most part, you can rely on the police who show up to deal with the problem in some respect. Your mileage may vary depending on where you live and what individual police officer you get. But, all things being equal, I would prefer to have the ability to call the police. And there are any number of situations in which I think I'd be perfectly happy to see martial law enacted in some specific circumstance and the rest. And it would be useful in terms of the preservation of order and all the rest. I have family members who've served in the military and close friends who have and do. And while there's a lot to be desired, it's a slow moving beast and kind of simple in some ways. I'm not all that ready to dispense with the idea that the American military is useful, or to dispense with the idea that the only decisions the American government makes are bad. I generally tend to distrust it. I think it's a necessary evil, and it's not my thing, but I'm not ready to dispense with it entirely. What's more important to me is what I was trying to point out, where you got individualism or individuality or individuation, if you will, on one side, and you've got collectivism or crisis cooperation on the other side, and the notion that there is a trigger that hits you. Or a people, at which point they flip over into crisis mode. Well, you got the model of low intensity conflict, which a lot of people will talk about. I'm hoping to do an interview at some point here soon with a guy called Forward Observer, who did a response to some of John Mark's videos on Civil War, specifically around this idea of low intensity conflict. And I think that there's some value in recognizing the difference between the civil and the military, and then saying, well, wait a minute, that was designed for a time when we had a declaration of war. Now we don't. We had the Vietnam conflict. The president is basically allowed to prosecute whatever war he or she might like to get into without requiring the Congress to declare war. So the whole idea of the civil versus the military or martial is quite dated. And so I think that what I'm trying to point out here is perhaps it's time to recognize that we have this old system of civil and martial, that it too is being worked around, and to recognize perhaps that today we are in a constant state of war at all places and in all places and at all times. And if that is the case, then there's every kind of war that we should give consideration to. If you read Sun Tzu, you hear about the idea that, attacking the enemy is ultimately the most foolish thing to do in many respects. You should instead try to understand what the enemy's plans are and attack the plans. And if you can't attack the plans, attack the alliances. The Chinese just recently, and I'm going to do a clip about this, in the 90s, wrote a book called Unrestricted Warfare, and a good bit of it has been translated into English. And they're sitting there talking theoretically about kinder weapons, the kind of weapons that will subjugate a nation but don't entail any kind of bloodshed, essentially expanding this idea beyond even low intensity conflict to explicitly recognize that mobilization for war entails the economics, the media, academia, social issues and activism, military weapons, energy, infrastructure, all of it.
And that's too slow. And that's too slow for the 21st century, you're saying, to have to go through all those means.
Like declaring war and triggering the martial response. Yes. And the bottom line is that it seems to be endless at this point until our will has been imposed yet again, at least within our own domains. It seems that it's likely that we're at war at all times, and a mobilization of a quote unquote militia, if you will, to answer that could take the form of writers and musicians. Now, I'm not trying to be cute, but if this, there's a little bit more truth to the idea of the great meme war if you recognize that fight is going on at all times, and that everyone can be a part of it to some extent, that it isn't just LARPing on the internet to spread a message. Obviously, there are many other things that could and should be done. At this point, I'm not talking about anything outside the law, to be explicit, but there is this argument about like a general sense of mobilization for a war that exists in all places and at all times, and at present shows no sign of ever ending. It's a philosophical approach, but I think it's one that has enough value that maybe we should consider it.
Putting the American government question that we've been talking about aside a bit, because we were starting and focused around the Caucasian question for this talk. Even though we might not like some of the government structures in Europe and resonate more with your understanding of the United States and its structures, do you see other white people, other people of European descent on the other side of the ocean in any of the other continents they exist in, and their struggles and what's being done? Do you see them as brothers and sisters? Because I'm just still trying to drill down this term, the fact that you're using the word we when talking about white people.
Well, I see them as more closely related to me than somebody from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or for example, an East Asian, sure. But I don't make friends like dogs do. So I recognize that they're closer to me. And I think that I would rather be among them, all things being equal.
Let me put it to you another way that might help. So if somehow someone waved a magic wand and we had everything we wanted in the United States tomorrow, but there were still the grooming gangs in England and the bombs going off in Sweden and all the other things there, do you think that you would devote any of your time and energy to trying to right those wrongs? Do you think you would feel any ownership over that?
No ownership, but a certain sense of obligation, certainly, and I'm doing it now. I mean, to whatever extent discussing things online is doing anything, but yeah, sure, yes, I come from there. They are
trying to get the temperature on that.
They're conspecifics, yes, and I have an interest in what they do and how well they do, to a certain extent. Drawing up short there, reining myself in terms of attempting to impose something on them, because I wouldn't want them to do that here. But sure, I just I'm just a little more pragmatic and probably a little bit more drawn up at a bit of a distance.
Fair enough. Jason, what's going on, buddy?
Shall we ask some questions answer some questions, I guess, from the community. We have a Shadow and asking, do you think that and this is over on Entropy, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, and just a big hello to everyone who has shown up since we have gotten underway. If you're showing up late with us, we warmly welcome you to the service of White Wellbeing tonight. This is It's Late Night Somewhere stream, and that is why, to a question that was asked a little earlier by a Mr. Stark, that why aren't we on video? It's so much more interesting when you can see us. Well, I agree, but the whole concept behind this particular show is that it is like a late night radio show. You're relaxing at home, and it is very late for some of you who are listening right now. There are I know some in France and Germany, and this is Scandinavia, very late for you. And of course, those of you in the UK, it is becoming very late for you all as well. And we are thankful to have you all here. Greece as well, I know. So good to see you all here. And if I didn't mention earlier, I do see that Laurel is here. Great to see you. She's doing wonderful things in the Nat Connect cause, her and Way of the World. So thank you both for that work. And that is why we are not on video tonight, but Jared and I will be back on video this Saturday. We will be talking about that again before we wrap up tonight. But we have the question here from Shadow. Do you think that we should do more petitions against the government to try and keep our politicians honest and true to the Constitution? Would either of you like to briefly tackle that? And we'll see if we can get to some more of these questions. And folks, if you have questions, now's the time to ask them, as the sand in the hourglass is beginning to run low. And we want to make sure that if any of you all need clarification or would like to make a point and have it spoken to, or a question, it doesn't have to be specifically about what we're talking about here tonight, but that helps if it is. So gentlemen, either of you have anything to say to that specific question?
Jared?
Oh, well, I was going to let our guest go first.
All right. Well, yeah, I guess petitions are cute. And once they have a certain number of names on them, it starts to look, I guess, more impressive. From my perspective, I'm much more interested in pinning them, removing the room to squirm and dissemble and, attempt to squirm out of things. So rather than petitioning, I like the idea of raising money to sick lawyers on people, or to take out full-page ads that have been carefully considered and set up as a way to create pressure simultaneously with some other element of the offensive that has been considered. I'm more into sitting down in a room with people and saying, this is what we want to change, and what lawful nonviolent means are available to us to cooperate and see this change. Strategic movements with communications, with propaganda, with media, with all the rest.
Very good. Jared, your thoughts?
Right. My initial thoughts dovetail with what Oliver was saying. I think that even though, we speak, and we may speak a little later, I'm not sure, or maybe another time, we were speaking about harmonizing, broadly speaking, individualism and collectivism. The same could be said of harmonizing elitism and populism. And so while in a differently structured society, if we had leaders, again, as I keep saying tonight, that are organically, we were all connected and of kin, this might be different, but sending in petitions to, in most cases, to how I perceive things work in the United States, only really to get a kind of a sideways or secondary product from that, if it can help change perceptions. And that is what Oliver was speaking about when he was speaking about some of his examples. It's about changing perceptions. Or on Power yesterday, see, the days keep blending into each other. I was going to say 2 days ago. It was only 1 day ago. Power on Mark Collette's channel. Him and Laura Tower were speaking about this initiative that she's starting to push back against all of these polls, these fake push polls that leftists do, because this creates perception. And then that, in a way, it tacitly mutes people and they think they're the only one that thinks this way. That's one of the great things about what we're doing now, is at least we connect with each other and you see you're not the only one. It gives you more confidence. Now, if you want to go listen to that in the beginning of Power, Jason does give some very sage advice on avoiding some pitfalls, because it's not so easy as just going out and asking a few people with a survey in your hand. You have to be very precise and very careful about certain things, how people reveal themselves, because of exactly what we're talking about. We still live in a paradigm where most people are going to be scared to death. Even if they think they might be anonymous, they're still going to be looking over their shoulder and might not really be telling you how they feel when it comes to these great taboos about being white and taking your own side. I mean, could you imagine the madness?
The shame, the horror.
The horror, yes. If you live in an area where you know a local politician, a state senator, or maybe a congressperson who is more of our thinking, and maybe dog whistles, but can't really go the full way, but you have good faith that they're more on our side, think like us, then I'm sure that there are some local politicians in the United States that you could and should use petitions or write things in to say that, hey, we're not okay with X, Y, and Z that happened in what you're watching over your constituency. So I'm not painting with too broad a brush. I'm not saying not to do it. But in the vast majority of cases in the United States, I would say it's more about that secondary product, not necessarily thinking that the politician, who more than likely is bought and paid off by the regime, that has to serve the anti-white agenda, that they're really going to do anything at the end of the day. It would be more to show other people that they're not alone, change perceptions, and all of the dominoes that fall from that.
Well said, Goodser. Both of you sound responses, and I think probably the whole of the community got some great takeaways there. We have an anti-white super chat from a Mr. Mark Shu, super chatting with $2 anti-white dollars and asking the question, hi guys, mention something you like about blacks. Well, I'm not going to put that question to my colleague and guest unless they fervently would like to answer it, and I'll tell you why. The reason is that it's an anti-white request or demand. It's anti-white because the premise, if the question or demand is answered, is that black people, for no reason other than being black, are disliked, and that these, therefore, are the exceptions to the dislike. So that is anti-white. We will not speak to it. I will say this, that if a black person is anti-white, he or she is just as reprehensible as a white person who is anti-white. And if a black person, which there are some, unfortunately, too few who support white well-being, if a black person would like to support white well-being, then they, just as a white person is welcomed, that black person is welcomed to support white well-being. So how does that feel, anti-white? You just set up this little scenario where you would like us to accept an anti-white premise, and I just demonstrated, as is the case with the cause for white well-being, that we do not hold anyone responsible, certainly not a group, unlike the anti-whites, who hold us as a people responsible for all of the real and imagined, absolutely fantastic, fictitious crimes of whites throughout time. Hold us as a people responsible for all of those acts, fake and real. We don't do that here. We do not hold people responsible, and we do not find people blameworthy for characteristics that are immutable. Individuals of any race make the decision of whether or not they are going to be anti-white. We do not categorize them. We acknowledge their decision. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to clarify that for everyone who might be new and for everyone who is a part of or member of our community, so that they can similarly parry such unethical attempts to undermine our efforts for the good of white well-being, and principally white children who are going to grow up in a world that is much uglier than the one into which we were born, because the people before us, our people before us, decided that they, hearkening back to the discussion we're having tonight, thought that they could continue to behave as individuals in a world of collectives, or that they thought that they, like cravens, that they were cravens, that they thought that they were going to hide in some redoubt in the mountains and everything would be okay then, or so selfish that they were going to just concern themselves with what happens with their immediate family, even shirking the duty not only to our people as Western kind, but even to their cousins, great grandparents, or grandchildren, etc. There are people like this, so selfish that they couldn't care less as long as they can run and hide for another day. And we don't want those people. Those will not be the people who survive this bottleneck in our people's history. It will be people like us, those who realize that we attain our individual well-being by way of our group's well-being, and we accept reality, the reality of the human animal, the reality of the jungle, and we act accordingly. And I'll say in regard and underscore what Oliver had said in pointing out about conflict and the steps that can and should be taken, that we here also in the Cause for White Wellbeing absolutely reject the idea that violence or warfare or anything of this nature is going to accomplish anything positive for us. In fact, we overtly state that we believe and know to be true that any violence is going to redound to the ill of us and our efforts. So we reject those who encourage and talk about violence, and we also reject their ideas that anything good will come of violence. We want all peoples to build beautiful memories with their families, with their children, and we at the same time are going to continue to serve white well-being because we love our people and we know that our individual well-being is only attainable by way of our group's well-being. The final thing I'll say is that though we reject war and violence of every single kind and will for all time, I specifically do. We had the question from an anti-white 2 weeks ago about the deaths of Iraqi children during the Gulf War. We absolutely repudiate that. We are the true anti-war. Where's the anti-war movement when the anti-whites are carrying out their wars across the globe in the name of the power holders, the anti-white elites? Where are they? They disappear. We are the voices that continue to shout out against these wars, who do nothing, these wars that do nothing for the good of our people. Having said that, if it comes right down to us, if you put us into a corner, we will defend ourselves. So we will move on, unless my colleague or guest will absolutely say something.
I just want to add, that was perfectly stated and demonstrated. I support how you handled that super chat 100%. Obviously, this person is being lazy and isn't familiar with us because the premise of the question is based on very one-dimensional, old, tired stereotypes. So please, if you're going to ask us a question, at least be familiar with our frame and what we do. But Jason, you spoke to it perfectly. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, my friend. All right. Well, then we will get to a genuine question from Xander over on Entropy, asking, just wondering how well you think this slogan with words numbering 14 might appeal to today's young men. Quote, a black number in every bank account, and I'm assuming that's from economics, black versus red, so meaning a positive number, a good number, a black number in every bank account, and a white baby in every womb. We'll go to Oliver and get his thoughts first.
Yeah, I don't imagine it matters much what I think about the notion of a white baby in every womb, because it takes two to tango, at least in our culture, and I'd like for it to, within our cultures, and I'd like for it to stay that way. In terms of voluntary child rearing, child making, and child rearing, I'm all for it. Perhaps I can maybe leap through the last flaming hoop of fire before I roll into obsolescence and reproduce myself. And as for maintaining oneself in the black, I'm all for it. That's all I got on that.
Jared, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add?
It would seem more.
Speaks. Let me just quickly say, everybody, Jared speaks very eloquently on the relationships, pair bonding, and we've had these discussions before. And Jared, I think we need to do, just as we do these health and wellness streams, in that health and wellness stream, we not only, ladies and gentlemen, have planned on discussing things like working out and eating properly. We will be doing more of these, but we also wanted to talk about things like relationships. And so Jared probably has something interesting, very interesting to say to these new 14 words.
Way to put me on the spot. Because I was about to say, unless I missed something, and I apologize if I did, it seemed like it was just a statement and really nothing to, you can't really argue with it. It is just a nice turn of phrase. So I wasn't really sure there was a question there. I was just saying more fertility, more abundance in a couple of different ways, financially and creating more of our people. But I'm sorry, was there a question there? It's a nice phrase. I'm not sure what else I have to add.
Xander's just wondering how well we think this slogan will work or might appeal to today's young men.
Well, mimetically, and Oliver is actually, his profession involves signs and symbols. Mimetically, if not everyone is familiar with the term "in the black," meaning that you have no debt and that you are, financially sound, that you have a surplus of assets and financial resources, that could confuse some people. So I don't know. What do you think of that, Oliver?
Well, as soon as any kind of tagline or expression or anything that's intended to proliferate through word of mouth gets out to 14 words, you're way out there. People don't generally grasp that. I mean, look at the things that do work. Like take an idea like a phrase like "just do it." Right? It sounds just like the angry superego, like, ragging on you because, you don't perform well and you judge yourself and you feel bad about it. And, what you really need to do is work out and it to just get off your lazy butt. And yet, you're not going to do it. So instead, just to do it becomes a conjuration to get you to stick your credit card into the slot at the counter to buy the shoes that will make you feel that you've at least moved towards it. It's 3 words. There's the old expression, I would have written you a shorter note, but I didn't have time. And so whatever you're trying to do with that
perhaps we could say the same with this stream.
Right. Well, yeah, I give advice, but I don't necessarily take it, but the
little self-deprecation, just
right.
Self-deprecation.
I would dial it back and attempt to massage it, as they like to say, and it always makes me feel nauseous. We need to massage this a little bit. I think that should be massaged down to fewer words.
Well said from some marketing geniuses, ladies and gentlemen. But thank you for the question. We also have another one from Shadows asking, how can we hold those in power accountable to, or I guess for, their actions that go directly against the law without enabling them to pay their way out of being punished? So I think the question here is, when we have these, effectively, I think we all realize at this point, certainly everyone in the community for white well-being realizes that the law in our countries now is just the appearance of law. It has long since ceased to be a blind application laws interpreted in as best as the interpreters can, in the sense that the laws were written and has long since become something that is interpreted in a way that benefits those with wealth and power, and is harshly expanded and used to neutralize and silence those who stand in the way of anti-white ideology and anti-whites inflicting harm on Western kind and Western civilization. I think perhaps many saw this meme of this drug emperor who received, after being responsible for the deaths of many thousands of people, just uncountable numbers. He received life and a couple of years beyond that. And then you have another case. I'm not going to mention it because I'm sure this stream will end up being zeroed out by the anti-whites at YouTube, right down the memory hole. But there's another individual recently who was associated in one form or another with the death of one person who received life plus something like 400 years. So demonstration that there really is no more law in the West. So to Shadow's question, how do we hold those in power accountable when they are able to break the law and, in case after case, walk away without any form of punishment? Either of you?
Well, I would say that one way is to not only attempt to ensure their adherence to the law, but to attempt to establish where it is necessary, yet again, the reality of whatever the particular laws are. And it's an uphill battle. It's difficult. It would require raising money and putting together a group of lawyers who were quite good and willing to undertake something likely to be as thankless as all of this, but they would be getting paid for it. You know, the idea would be to raise money and to put together something like a 501c3, some sort of corporate entity that would serve as the vehicle for pooling money that would be donations. And then, for example, to go out into the world and find lawyers who already have the sort of outlook that one would need for this, and to put together a team of them, get them on retainer, and have a strategy. You know, you'd have to speak with them beforehand and find out, like, you know, where do you see cases that aren't, you know, where there is a precedent, or where there's a sufficiency of case law to establish that, like, this is how it really is, and yet we see that it's being ignored and perverted or twisted or whatever. You know, you'd have to kind of work for a while in order to identify where the best shot is to have this impact, and then to begin to bring those lawfare weapons to bear on those who step out of line. You know, another way is to ridicule. You know, you put together money and you create comic videos. You know, I'm not particularly good at being funny, at least not intentionally. And however, there are people who are good at it and who are good at mockery, which has incredible power. But, you know, we have to recognize that it is within our power to raise and deploy money in pursuit of a given end. It's just, what's most important is to intelligently identify how to go about a thing. You know, in one case, perhaps comedy would be real effective, and yet in another case, it would have to be lawyers. To say nothing of whether or not you could have lawyers and comedy brought to bear from different directions on the same thing. I think the main thing that is missing is long-term thinking and planning. You know, most of the topics, you know, we'll tackle topics, we'll tackle ideas, we'll have discussions about it, or it'll, you know, kind of ripple through a group of people over a time where one channel will discuss this, and then maybe you'll catch a different angle over here. You know, maybe Jared Taylor's saying one thing and alt-hype is saying another, and then you go across the pond and you get to hear that Millennial Woes has this idea, and also Morgoth has described it. But what I don't see is people coming together and saying, over the next year, there is a particular problem that we want to solve. And much like, you know, the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, or Siddhartha, you know, he's not going to get up until he achieves enlightenment. Similarly, could we say, here is the issue that we want to deal with. We need a group of solutions, and we're going to get together and put our heads together on this until we have identified exactly what we want to change and what our strategy is going to be to change it, and then do it. So I guess the short answer, the shorter note I should have written was think strategically, plan together, and execute in cooperation with others of like mind.
So the question is how to hold people abusing their power more accountable.
Correct.
Essentially.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, yeah, I like what Oliver said about shaming. This is a tremendous topic, but I like what Oliver said about shaming and cooperation. Longer term, it dovetails with everything that we speak about all the time, and it's that if the people in these positions were different people, then you'd be getting different results. I think we need to make it harder to be a leader. I think that we're incentivizing people who, I know there's the old adage that, the golden rule really is whoever has the gold makes the rules. But to whatever degree that we can use both law and custom, because as Jason said, law only goes so far, and that speaks to how I began. It's who's interpreting the law. So I think that you do need to have laws on the books that makes it harder to be a leader, but also just practices in our culture. And I realize I'm attacking this a little more long term. Again, this is really something, I'm just throwing out a few points that would really be fodder for a longer conversation. This would take a lot of planning, and there'd be a lot of different aspects, social and political. But I don't know why we can't have things like, if you want to be a leader in government, and I'm talking about making it harder than it is now, then I don't see why we can't have something where there's more disclosure. If you claim that you want to be a public servant and that the good of the people, and ideally really, as I say, the folk, when we get back to how things really need to be, is what you want to devote yourself to, the way that I would trust Jason Kuna, my friend here. I know that if he were to be a public servant in a government in a different day and age, he would have this kind of attitude of service. Do you think that the people who are running for elected officials in our Western governments have that kind of sense of duty and service? Maybe a few, but the vast majority don't, and certainly not in this folkish way. But why not more disclosure? Why not not only before, but for certain years after you've served, that certain financial records have to be made more visible publicly? Certainly one of the first things Jason and I ever spoke about is national service. I think that more people, really everyone, should have some kind of national service just to have some skin in the game, just to have that experience, that create this feeling that we're all in it together, and that young leaders who really might have the right character for this can be identified earlier with programs like that. All sorts of things, but I'll keep it brief for now. Yeah, I'm thinking more a little longer term. So I apologize to the questioner if that doesn't sound quite practical. It's not like I have some grand plan. Again, this would take a lot of minds working over time, but I do appreciate the spirit of the question.
And I just want to throw in there very quickly, I completely agree with what Jared was just saying about adding custom. As explained to me by a red-headed gentleman with an FTW tattoo on his arm, when I explained that the frame on my car had been bent after being rear-ended, he said, well, what you do is you just basically just run a chain through the back of the frame there, and then you just wrap it a few times around this big old oak I got in my backyard here, and now give yourself some slack and just step on the gas. But I do tell you, make sure you got your seatbelt on. And and he said, because metal has a memory. And, when you think about anything of the frame or the structure that's been bent, metal does have a memory. And, when Jared brought up the notion of custom, that's really, really important, because, you can take a look at law. And of course, all of this is reflected in law too, right? You got common law and all the rest of statutory stuff. But the point being that when you bear in mind the fact that you're going to come at it with the legal aspect too, but you're also going to come at it with the attitude of the people and the deep-seated things that kind of shape how they see right and wrong. And, you know, when you sit down in a war room, so to speak, and the goal is to develop the ideas that are necessary to make things happen, or to hold, for, in this case, a politician accountable. And you plan not only for the law, but you plan for the existing memory and the bent piece of metal that you're trying to straighten. Then, yeah, working with existing custom, even some customs that have been forgotten, you'd be surprised how much they continue to exist beneath the surface. So that's just my short additional endorsement of what Jared just said.
And there's no reason that you can't put it in language. I've said this a few times, and again, I agree with Jason. A written legal document is not a be-all and end-all. It's one piece of the puzzle. But if I were to draft a constitution for some kind of state entity in the future, more aligned with our values and how we think, I would put as an addendum after the legalities. I don't see why you wouldn't want to put some things that weren't technically law, but still spoke to the spirit of what the nation is, what its values are, what it looks for in a leader, just to have another way that spirit is articulated and that future leaders and orders can be evaluated against that. If we were to say something explicitly about our heritage and upholding that and looking for certain signs and characteristics of people who have a true love of that, yes, of course, we know things could be manipulated. Certain sociopathic, psychopathic personalities could try to put that face on and adopt that face to get to the position of power. But I'm sure that we can think of some clever ways to at least hem that in and make that less likely through a combination of law and custom. And what I'm speaking to here now, specifically in this addendum, is to codify and articulate the custom as well. So it's not just a legal document, but it's something that does express the spirit of the people. And that, God damn it, how about this just for starters, that there is a people that has an interest in perpetuity, in time, and that is the basis. Jason, I don't know if you've had anything you'd like to add about that.
No, I don't think so. I think we have just a couple of more questions here, and then we'll round out this conversation and wrap it up. It has actually been really a boon having this. It's late night somewhere tonight. It ended up being much more stimulating than prepped live streams normally are for a lot of different groups, not just in the white positive sphere. So I'm delighted to have been a part of it and had the honor to be surrounded by so many wonderful people in the chat. My great colleague Jared George and Oliver over here, Semiogogue. So it's been a scintillating evening. Let's finish up with a couple of thoughts here in this final super chats and question. I did want to mention, though, it seems that Mr. Shu may have been intellectually honest in his question. And if that is the case, then your dollars are not anti-white. And we thank you for the question.
Yes, I'd like to say, at least in the chat, that he said he was asking that question, what do we like about people of African descent, black people, in good faith? So if we take him at his word that it was in good faith, Jason still demonstrated perfectly how you would deal with someone who's coming from that frame. But Mark, if you were asking your question in good faith, then of course it's nothing against you. It's just how we interpreted it in the moment.
Precisely. So exactly what Jared just said. It's a great learning experience for all of us, and particularly those who, when reading that question, thought, this is a good way to show anti-whites how we don't dislike people for immutable characteristics. And there are actually these reasons. You can see how I spelled that out, that indeed the reverse would be the case by posing and answering such a question. Mr. Shu wrote tagged me in a statement saying that Jared Taylor has written about all the things that he likes about black people. I have never seen such a document which is not to say that it doesn't exist. It may well exist. And certainly, Jared Taylor takes a very different tact than myself when serving white well-being. And so that might well be something that he wrote in the past. Nonetheless, we will take you at your word, Mr. Shu, and thank you for the $2 investment in white well-being. And to wrap this up, we have JK160. Great to see you here as well. Another hero in the community of white well-being, super chatting with $5. And he writes 2 words: go free. Amen. Thank you very much for that. That's what we're doing here, and we're going to continue doing on a regular basis. That is what is going to enable us to recapture that glorious destiny so that we can look back on this as an awful dream, an awful nightmare that we had to get through. But indeed, folks, we are lucky in the sense that few generations in the histories of our people are given the opportunity to truly prove their mettle, to truly demonstrate that they are heroes of our folk and that their names are worthy of being put down into our books, being written across our statues, and sung in the songs of our children. That is the opportunity that is afforded to us. So the winning is there. The laurel is there for those who are willing to be heroes today. That is what I say to you. We just had Roy Danton, $4.99, the great Roy Danton, another wonderful person, a great healer of our children with all of the dollars that he invests. $4.99. Like the format, makes it easier to listen to the stream while working out. Fantastic. Getting into shape as well. And coming back again with the exact same super chat, another $4.99. And same verbiage. Thank you very much for that. By the way, folks, there was a poll over on Entropy this evening asking folks if they enjoyed the format of ILNS, and 100% of people answered in the affirmative. So thank you for that. Let's get to the final question, super chat and final question of the night, which is from High Speed Drifter. Good to see you again. I haven't seen you. You've probably been here and I've just missed you. I'm sure it is my error. Super chatting with $2.14. Thank you very much. Is the New World Order about to collapse? A tiny question, easy one to end on tonight. So when each of you answer,
I have it on good faith. The answer is yes. And then we'll close out.
So yes, exactly. We'll speak to that, both of you, and if you could also anything else you'd like to add, closing thoughts, and maybe what you're working on next, and then we will wrap everything up tonight. Guess we'll begin with our esteemed guest, Oliver.
Thank you, sir. I guess first shot out of the box would be to respond to the question in terms of the New World Order collapsing or ending soon. I will say only that it is a consummation devoutly to be wished. We shall see. All things ultimately put a period to their existence eventually. So yeah, we'll see. In terms of what I'm working on in the future, I have a few clips coming out. I just did some recent interviews with my friend Tim Rudisil that will be posted, one on Jeffrey Epstein and another one on this business of the squad, some further thoughts on the squad. And there's more coming down, a clip that will shortly be coming up on unrestricted warfare and that Chinese military manual I mentioned. Otherwise, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you, Jason, and to thank you as well, Jared. I appreciate you guys being willing to have me on. I do appreciate it. It is always a pleasure to talk to you and to hear your thoughts and to turn up the dial of ideas. And as for everyone else, sorry, man, I had to do it. And for everyone else in the chat, all I will say before wishing you all a very good night is be white.
Amen to that.
Well, all right. I think, Jason, as I'm speaking, you may want to look for there. Looks like there's a super chat at large from Machiavelli Sucks. I don't know what platform. Maybe someone can tell us in the chat. But please do pay attention to what I'm about to say. Anyone, especially coming late or wasn't around in February and March when we were doing some of these It's Late Night Somewhere shows, which is what you were listening to tonight, because Jason and I do a couple of other formats besides the after party, which is when we're all on camera and we focus on really showcasing a certain individual content creator, what they're all about. This was not, even though it's Thursday, we often do tap on Thursday these days, this was not an episode of the after party, although Oliver has been on the after party twice. But we had this planned for a couple of reasons this day, but we have an amazing episode of the after party that is coming up in 2 days on Saturday, the 27th at 4 p.m. Eastern US. That is 9 o'clock at night in the UK and 10 o'clock in Central Europe, or as they would say, 2200 hours more often in Central Europe. Mm-hmm. And this will be with yet another person that is new to the after party, her first time on it, and that is Ilenia Contessa. She, if you don't know that name, you might know her as the administrator of the wildly popular Facebook page Nordic Beauty. Has over 100,000 people following it, and another page related to that called Protect Beauty. And Ilenia is a very intelligent young woman. She speaks 5 languages. She is from Italy, but has also lived in Germany. So she's going to be able to give us some on-the-ground reports from Europe. She's also involved in a cultural revival movement in Italy. This organization she's going to be talking to us about has so far been involved with the construction of 2 temples that go back to old Roman folk religions, and she's actually translated a book about this as well. So she has a lot of impressive credentials, and we've been looking forward to speaking to her for a long time, and we're able to work it out for Saturday. So she's our guest on the after party this Saturday. So please do look forward to that. Also, and Jason, let me know if I think you're jumping on this as well. I'll be able to jump on for a little bit. A few hours later, White Art Collective, Jeff from White Art Collective does his Saturday night stream, and he's going to be focusing on the White People's Quarterly, just put out by White People's Press, a new magazine. And Jason and I are both featured in there. There is an excerpt from Jason's Born Guilty, and I wrote an entirely new poem just to celebrate this inaugural issue of this new magazine, this new project. So Jeff of White Art Collective, it's not his project. It's another gentleman who started White People's Press, but Jeff of White Art Collective helped out with it. He's someone who's been heavily involved in it, and he's going to be celebrating this magazine that just came out this week, and he's going to be having a lot of contributors on. So Jason and I might be popping in for a little bit of that. So look out for announcements about that Saturday night. We're also going to try to get the gentleman behind the magazine on for an after hours. Speaking of non-tap formats, that's kind of the middle ground between what you're listening to now and tap. It's also a little less formal and doesn't necessarily have to be a 2-hour formal interview the way tap is. It could just be a quick highlight the way, maybe we'll speak to him for half an hour to an hour. We're going to speak to the gentleman who is behind this wonderful new magazine. It's beautiful looking. Please do go to It's White People Press. The S is not in the URL. I'll double check that as I'm saying it, but I'm pretty sure it's White People Press, not White People's Press. You can get it in physical copy or digital download. It's very, very well done. And so, yes, we'll be speaking to him at some point, hopefully next week, on After Hours. And let me just make sure I have that URL. It is, I'm going to be pulling it up now. And as I'm waiting to pull it up, I'll just say this one thing. I dropped this link in the chat, but Porridge and I, lovely Porridge from Australia, are doing this Nationalist Content Creators contest as well. If you heard earlier, Semiogogue Oliver is going to be submitting a video. Jason is as well. We have a lot of people who are already on board. Way of the World is on board. Very exciting. It's an October 15th deadline, so you have some time. But the premise is if you had a 5-minute video to play to the entire world to make a case for what we stand for, but to reach out to the people who aren't with us yet. You have to be smart about it. You have to have broad appeal. Parj and I do reserve the right to not accept every video if it's, you're going to submit something a little weird or trolly. But we have a contest, and always nice to have a little friendly competition. But the most wonderful thing is we're going to have a whole library of really powerful videos that advertise our purpose in a clear, concise way. Again, the premise, if you knew it was going to be played around the world, but then it would be your last video. That's the part I didn't say earlier. With all the censorship going on, it's what if you had one last message, but then you knew this would be it. So please do check the links in the description as well, or me and lovely Parj, his channel's Ruination Media, our social media for details about that contest. And I was right, it is whitepeoplepress.com. So the magazine, the White People's Quarterly I was talking about, where Jason and I both have pieces in there, you can find all about it at whitepeoplepress.com. Again, we'll be talking about that on White Art Collective's Saturday night stream in a couple nights, and hopefully we'll have the gentleman behind White People's Quarterly on a quick stream we're looking at next week, but stay tuned for announcements.
Well said, brother. You really covered everything there. I will just, I want to.
There was a lot to say, so hopefully you will all bear with me.
Now, everybody can compete in this competition. You and Porridge's competition, correct? Anyone who wants to make a video, of course, you do have the right to. Not every video that's going to be submitted is necessarily automatically going to be a participant in the running, because somebody could make a video that is.
Yeah, we're not saying
right.
We're not egalitarians here. Yeah, it has to be right for it has to be right for the project.
Right.
It can't be trolly, and it can't be something that's going to get people banned or embarrass us.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put forth a good faith effort. Mm-hmm. If this was your last video played to the world, and you want to make a case, and especially not only to galvanize all of us, the type of people listening, but those who are just outside, who are scared to dip their toe into this, but know something's wrong. It's really about outreach. If you put forth a good effort, then there's no reason you shouldn't be part of it. We have this channel, Kindred Creators, where we're going to be mirroring everything. I don't want to get into all the details. Again, I'll put a link in the chat again as you close, Jason, to the announcement video that Parj did.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I dropped one there as well. I was able to track down Machiavellia Sucks super chat, and tell me, folks, if you could, because this is a problem I have been having on my going free episodes. And so, did Machiavellia Sucks super chat appear in the chat, the live chat? If so, let me know, because I did not see it as it played, and I'm just wondering if others saw it as it played. So it was for $1.99. Thank you very much for that kind investment in white well-being. Writing, we need to get control of our immigration policies. More truthful words have rarely been said. Thank you very much for that kind super chat and the admonition. It is absolutely the case. We haven't been in control of our immigration policies for a very, very long time, and that is why our countries look the way they do. All of these things have been done against the will of the masses of our people in the country. If you would have asked even the most I'm going to say liberal, even though I normally don't use the word, but even that kind of individual, if you were to have asked that person in the 50s or the 40s, do you want to turn the country over, or any other decade up until the most recent ones? Do you want to turn the country over to other peoples? And of course, when you have a democracy and you invite in enough foreign peoples, they eventually control the destiny of your country by way of their vote. And it doesn't matter whether or not you know the most based, fill in the blank, because if he or she is not the majority of that immigrant group of people, then you are not going to get that outcome from them. This is pretty simple logic. No one would have said, yes, let's turn over the destiny of the country to other peoples. So clearly this was done in an unscrupulous and underhanded way, utterly illegal under any definition And so before we go, though, I want to mention I saw Zed Des working with me on time stamping, a big spotlight on her for the great work that she's doing. Here's Sue, 82, I see. Of course, Roy Roots is here. Rick, a lot of people showing up late as we're wrapping up. And it's great to see you all. Venus Rising is here. Such a great community. I will, right before we leave, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say a little bit of self-deprecating humor. I was talking about this White People's Quarterly on a stream the other day, and I was giving it accolades, and I was talking about how adult it was. And of course, my mind was not in the gutter. And I did have someone reach out to me and say, don't call it adult. So I take that back. It's not an adult magazine, ladies and gentlemen. It's a sophisticated magazine. It's mature. It is, yes, indeed. It is well done.
See, I don't see that as self-deprecating. I think that that reveals you are a pure soul, Jason. That is a beautiful thing.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, I did not know how that would land. I didn't realize that it would land as something quite other than I had.
It's not an adult magazine, people.
It's
in that regard. It's a very wholesome magazine.
Very wholesome. When
it's a family, it really is a family magazine.
It is a family magazine. But I was saying there, I'm in this magazine. Jared's in this magazine. It's an adult magazine. That totally landed on a lot of people.
Yeah, there's at least one person out there that was like, so they heard you say that, and they said, "Oh, I knew it. This is what I've been waiting for."
It's like I've been waiting for it since the last time Burt Reynolds appeared in Playgirl.
Oh my gosh! Yes,
it was a tap centerfold. Oh my!
We definitely did not. We're not producing or participating in a very adult magazine. It is a classy magazine, ladies and gentlemen. The kind of magazine, I think I actually followed up that sentence with, it's the kind of magazine that you could show family. And that really must have freaked some people out. So it is still a magazine you can show family because it is indeed very classy, well done. It is slick and sharp, professional. It is definitely not adult. But I want to thank you all for being here for It's Late Night Somewhere. We had a lot of fun. I know I did. I hope you all did. We should definitely do this more often and have Oliver back more often because he's an extraordinarily bright man, and we learn a lot when we talk, exchange a lot of ideas, and I look forward to seeing you all back here with us some point in the near future on another episode of It's Late Night Somewhere. Good night.